is a walkthrough of a project we did in class where we used a loop to simulate the rolling of a pair of dice 1,000 times. And we're going to display the rolls in a list box. So when we click the Loop Dice Roll button, it will roll 1,000 times in a loop, display the rolls here, but then also keep track of how many times snake eyes came up, how many times a 2 and a 1 came up, how many times double sixes came up, and so forth. So statistically, a 7 should be the most common roll because we can get a 1 and a 6, a 2 and a 5, and a 3 and a 4. And then 6 and 8 would be the second most common. And it's basically a bell curve is what we end up getting with 7 being in the center. We want to prove that with this app, and so I've created also some labels here for charting how many times or what percentage those rolls come up. So I've already created the interface. Let me just walk you through it. We have, of course, our button named BTN Loop. I have a list box named LST Rolls. And then I have labels for the values of 2 through 12 and labels for displaying the number of rolls for that particular roll. And these are labels with auto size set to false and a border style. So it looks like text boxes. We could, of course, use text boxes here. And then each one of these is a label that I named LBL bar 2, LBL bar 3, LBL bar 4, down to LBL bar 12. By the way, these labels over here are named LBL 2, LBL 3, and down to LBL 12. The bar, or this colored label, of course, I set the auto size to false. I gave it a back color. And the size I created here is 222, 21. I'm actually going to adjust that a little bit. I'm going to select all of these just by dragging through them with the pointer. And let's set the size to 200. And I'll explain that in a minute. I'm going to change my code a little bit in this project. So that's my interface. Let's go ahead and take a look at the code. I'm going to bring the properties and docket back down the bottom. So for our code, for the button, everything's going to happen in the button. We're going to clear the list box. So if we run this multiple times, that clears the beginning. Then I created integer values for die 1, die 2, and total. So die 1 will be a random number generated between 1 and 6. Die 2, the same thing. And total will be the combination of those two together. And that total then will be reflected in these integer values in terms of how many times did I roll a 2, how many times did I roll an 8, and so forth. We're going to use a random number generator that I just simply named R and D. And then we're going to have a loop. So I have this for loop. The for loop is going to start with a counter of I equaling 1. And it's going to increment I each time through the loop as long as I is less than or equal to 1,000. That'll give me 1,000 rolls. Each time through the loop, I'm going to generate a value for die 1 being a random value. So I'm using R and D, calling the next method, passing it a 6. That gives me a 0 to 5. As far as the values that can come up, by adding 1, we'll get 1 through 6. I do the same thing for die 2. Combine those two together and put it into total, and that's what I'm going to display in my list box. Then we use a switch structure on the total. And so we have case 2, I rolled snake eyes, or 1 and 1. We're going to add 1 to total 2. If I roll a 1 and a 2 or a 2 and a 1, it's going to add 1 to total 3 and so forth. So there's our case structures all the way down to 12. And then I have a default, which is basically going to add nothing to total 2. You have to have a default. So we should never have something that's not either 2 through 12. And then I'm going to take those values and display them in my labels. So lbl2.text equals total2.toString. I'm going to show a message box of done. We've gone through that loop 1,000 times. Then I'm going to set the bar of each of my labels. So lbl bar 2.width will equal whatever value is total 2. Now if I was going to show other values other than 1,000, maybe I want to give the user a chance to only do 20 rolls or 10,000 rolls, we probably want to turn these into percentages, which is why I set that bar to 200. And that's my code. Let's run this and watch it work. There's my 1,000 dice rolls. We can see the rolls that came up in the list box. And there's actually 1,000 numbers there between 2 and 12. And we can see the bell curve here. 168 times it came up as 7 out of the 1,000. So that's 16.8% of the time. If I roll this again, we get different numbers each time. Here it came up 170. And occasionally, if you do this enough times, you will get a point where maybe 6 or 8 comes up more times than 7. Statistically, that's not likely, but it does happen. So here's one where 8 came up 160 times, 7 came up 159. So it doesn't happen very often, but it can happen. I've never seen 5 or 9 be the highest number out of 1,000 rolls. So that's our 1,000 rolls loop project.